Welcome, podcast listeners. We are back for podcast 5, and we have a barnstorming podcast tonight. We're going to be focusing on the Later Crusades, a very popular wargaming period, and we have an interview with the president of the Society. Couple of things to say before we crack straight on. All the supporting material will be found on the blog Gamer at the End of Time.blogspot, and the URL for that is in the show notes. Also, all the material photos will be up there. An opportunity to have much more eye candy as we progress and develop the podcast. Other thing I want to say, if there is anything that you want to say about the podcast, to request information, or to announce products, or announce events, announce tournaments, please get hold of me, Ray Duggins, on Facebook, or Richard Jeffrey Cook, or Nick Goutrogger. We're very friendly, and we want to hear from you and to improve the podcast. So, as usual, without further ado, no fuss, here we go, the Later Crusade. So this is our 4th podcast about army lists, and obviously the other podcast we did was a special on the changes for 2021. Now, I know you're going to universal approval and interest in this podcast tonight, because we are going to be looking at the Crusades after the 4th Crusade. So crusading armies and enemies after and including the 4th Crusade. I don't even know if it's including the 4th Crusade, but I'm sure the experts will tell me that. And as always, you'll be glad to know that it's not me that's doing much of the talking. And tonight, Richard is going to lead. But obviously, we have our Arab army expert, Nick Horsemeister Goutrogger. So he will obviously be chipping in about the Arab armies. And I did ask them before whether we call it the Crusades. I said, I'm sure the people on the other side called it something else, something not quite as polite as Crusade. But without further ado, we will crack on about basically the later Crusader period in our wonderful MeG hobby.
Thank you, Ray. So today we're going to look at the Crusades from 1204 onwards, which corresponds to our earlier podcast about Byzantine armies after 1204. So the 4th Crusade was a bit of a non-event in the Middle East, because they didn't actually get within 1,000 miles of Jerusalem, which was officially the target of the 4th Crusade, and they inadvertently conquered the Byzantine Empire instead.
As you do.
As you do. So the reason for the 4th Crusade was actually that Jerusalem had fallen after the defeat at the Battle of Hattin, and the 3rd Crusade had failed to capture Jerusalem. As a result, from about 1204, the Franks really controlled what's known as the Kingdom of Acre, which was really basically the cities of Jaffa, Arsuf, Caesarea, Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, and some of the fortresses interior. Along with this, they still controlled what was known as the County of Tripoli to the north, and beyond that, the Principality of Antioch. While on the other side, after the death of Saladin, the Ayyubid Empire sort of collapsed into civil war, but was eventually reunited by Al-Adil, who was the brother of Saladin, in 1202. Now, the strategy of the Crusaders then became one of trying to capture Egypt, which was the center of the Ayyubid Empire, rather than trying to retake Jerusalem directly. And the first major attempt occurs in 1218, when the 5th Crusade sails from Acre and lands at Damietta, which is a port at the mouth of the Nile. They besieged Damietta from May 1218 till November 1219, a whole 18 months, until the city eventually fell from starvation. A pretty horrible siege on both sides, a lot of disease and just pretty nasty all round. In 1221, they then set out to capture Cairo. but unfortunately they were defeated by the Sultan Al Kamil, who he had succeeded from Al-Adil in 1218. So this basically set the Crusaders back to square one.
Is that when they were caught on two sides of a river or something like that? Or I can't remember, mate. When they were defeated.
I think they overextended themselves.
Yeah.
And, having been defeated, the army tried to retreat back to Damietta, pretty much annihilated in the process. So the Fifth Crusade, officially, Emperor Frederick of the Holy Roman Empire had promised to join the Crusade, but he actually never left Europe at that time. And as a result, he actually got excommunicated by the Pope. But he arrived in the Middle East in 1228 to lead what is known as the Sixth Crusade. He immediately basically upset all the nobles in what are known as the Outremer states, the Crusader state, by claiming the regency of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the name of his infant son. Most of the Outremer states actually supported John, who was of the Lusignan dynasty, I believe, and he was regent for Alice of Champagne and her son, who was Henry I of Bruce. All gets a bit complicated. But essentially you have the two ancient medieval dynasties squabbling over who actually are rulers of Jerusalem. But squabbling wasn't only a Crusader thing. The Ayyubids had also fallen amongst to squabbling amongst themselves. And in fact, the presence of Frederick and his German knights seems to have been sufficient for the Ayyubids to basically agree a 10-year truce and conceding Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth to the Crusaders as long as the Islamic population still had rights to worship. The Patriarch of Jerusalem actually refused to accept the treaty. And while this was going on, the Pope, who had, as I mentioned, had executed Frederick, he actually invaded Frederick's territories back in Italy. So Frederick basically was forced to return back to Europe, and he left in a pretty ignominious fashion because he was showered with offal by the citizens of Acre. So not very kind treatment. Somebody who was supposed to be supporting the Crusader cause.
Not the most popular.
So yeah, the Crusaders carry on with their disputes between Frederick's line and Henry's line. In 1239, the truce with the Ayyubids expired, and you then get what's known as the Barons' Crusade, because various barons arrived from Europe and led an army which was actually defeated by the Ayyubids at Gaza. That was November 1239. And as a result, Jerusalem fell once again to the Ayyubids, this time to a leader called Dawood. But in 1241, they gave Jerusalem back to the Franks, so it remained under Latin control. This was again because of the wars amongst the various Ayyubid leaders. So back to the sort of status quo, really. The next crusade would be led by Louis IX. But that's in 1249, and Louis captures Damietta, again the port at the mouth of the Nile. But then the Crusaders were again defeated by the Egyptians. However, in the process of this campaign, the Egyptian Sultan was actually overthrown by his Mamluk Generals. And so you get the start of the Mamluk dynasty as opposed to the Ayyubid dynasty.
I think it's worth saying that the progress of the Ninth Crusade is almost identical to the Fifth Crusade. They take Damietta, although the Ninth Crusade take it very easily due to different circumstances. Then there's a lot of dithering. Then they advance into Egypt, and in this case get as far as a town called Mansoura, which is on the other side of a canal that runs off. They spend months trying to get across this. And when some of them do, they get rather badly defeated. one of Louis IX's brothers gets killed, and something like 280 out of the 300 Templars in the force are killed in the town. And then the crusade then tries to retreat back towards Damietta. It all goes horribly, horribly wrong. They're riddled by disease, and the remnants are then captured by the Mamluks. And Louis IX actually has to ransom himself to get out. But the basic campaigns of the two are practically identical. If you look at a map of the movements of the armies, he says, which one's which?
Yeah, but Egypt, if you're going to campaign in Egypt, you're sort of restricted to going up and down the Nile, basically.
Oh, absolutely. The Nile will feature. It has to feature. But really, the progress of these two campaigns is remarkably similar. Although the Fifth Crusade actually stayed longer in Egypt than the Seventh, but it is quite fascinating just how similar they are.
Yes, it's the Seventh Crusade, isn't it, rather than Ninth?
Oh, sorry. Yes, my apologies. The alleged Ninth Crusade. I'm not sure the Ninth actually justifies the title. Sorry. Anyway, Richard, back to you. Sorry, you were doing the history.
Who's counting? Anyway, so yeah, after the Seventh Crusade, we get new kids on the block arriving in the form of the Mongols. So this sort of changes the dynamics in the Crusader lands. First off, the arrival of the Mongols is actually prefaced by the displacement of the Khwarezmi, I think that's how you pronounce it, who were Arab, well, I think they're Turks actually, but they were living in the Arab world to the east of the Ayyubids. And they arrive and sack Baghdad in 1258, and Aleppo and Damascus gets captured in 1260. And in effect, the Mongols have destroyed both the Abbasid Caliphate and the last of the Ayyubid states. In the process, the Silesian Armenians, these are the Armenians living in sort of what's, I suppose, now southeastern Turkey, and the Principality of Antioch, they both submit to the Mongol, which probably was a fairly wise move. The Kingdom of Jerusalem doesn't, and in fact, it's only saved complete defeat when the Mongol Khan, Möngke Khan, he died, and as a result, the Mongol leaders went back to elect a new great Khan, and that actually saves the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In September 1260, the Mongols are actually defeated by the Mamluks at the Battle of Ain Jalut. So Syria falls under Egyptian control. And then you get the great Mamluk general Baybars. He assassinates the Mamluk Sultan and he takes control of the Mamluk. His presence is very significant because he is far more hostile to the Franks. And he takes advantage of continuing disputes between the Lusignans and the Hohenstaufens, that's the German line, who keep, even at this date, still arguing over who should be rulers of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And in the process, he basically recaptured the remaining outer states. Antioch falls in 1268. In 1271, both the Hospitaller fortress at Crac de Chevalier, which is an amazing fortress, and the Teutonic Montfort Castle, which is equally impressive, they both fall. Acre actually holds out till April 1291, but then falls, and in July 1291, Beirut is the last remaining mainland Crusader city. And in fact, any Christians who couldn't escape that siege were either killed or, and that signifies the end of the outreach in.
Can I ask a quick question? Because these castles didn't fall because of gunpowder, did they? No, because of cannon. Too early for that.
In fact, they largely fall by deceit. Right. I think it's fair to say the Crusaders actually, I believe, abandoned one. I can't remember which one it was, but maybe Crac de Chevalier. they almost abandon it, believing their cause is hopeless, when in fact they could probably have held out. It's generally pretty much a saga of mistakes.
Right, because they were incredibly impressive construction.
They were indeed. We're reaching the stage at this point that the counterweight trebuchet is the dominant artillery piece of the time. Siege.
Right.
And if you've ever seen reenacted demonstrations of counterweight trebuchet, the ability of those stones to go through solid stone walls, quite impressive.
Yeah, I've actually seen it at Warwick Castle. They do it's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway,
I've actually helped crew one in Denmark, a really huge, which has got a double treadmill to power to pull the weight down. Four people, two in each side, treadmill either side, two people. And then it throws a stone out into the sort of neighbouring river, and it is very impressive.
Yeah.
And the Muslims were well up on this technology. Although, Richard's absolutely right to say a lot of these castle places fell to deceit or misunderstanding of the. But I think one factor in that was that if the Muslims did sit down to besiege a place, they fairly rapidly would construct quite a number of these counterweight trebuchets, plus a host of smaller ones, which would then start knocking chunks off. I'm sure that played on the defenders' minds.
In fact, in a lot of medieval sieges, the castle would often agree to surrender on the date the trebuchet was completed, if it hadn't been relieved by that time. And that's actually quite a common feature of medieval siege.
So Kingdom of Heaven isn't complete rubbish.
Probably
sharp intake of breath.
Technology a little early, and
sharp intake of breath,
possibly in a bit of cinematic overplay on its effect, and the inevitable overuse of fire missiles. But they were. I mean, but moving away from Outremer. Was it Edward I of England had one built outside? Was it Stirling Castle? It was actually named something like the Great Wolf.
Right.
And it was generally they arrived prefabricated. These massive ones put together. They were the cutting edge of technology.
Yes, go down to IKEA and buy your flat trebuchet.
And just to link in, the Mongols adopted them with alacrity by basically roping in Muslim engineers, which is possibly
and arguably it was what allowed the Mongols to conquer China, and was actually the adoption of trebuchet.
Yeah, it certainly made them able to take fortified places much more effectively. Step powers had ever done before. I know Richard invited me to comment on the Mamluks earlier, but I'm not sure I can add anything to what he said there. I think that the key point he made is quite right, that the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Principality of Antioch basically fell when a powerful Muslim ruler who could command the Middle Eastern Muslim world finally decided it was worthwhile doing.
But wasn't the Mamluks was a system?
Yes, okay, we can touch on that side of it if you like. Yeah. Mamluks, they're often called slave soldiers. That's not quite accurate. I mean, the system dates back to Abbasid times in the 9th century, when one of the Abbasid caliphates, to create a more centralized and loyal army, started buying up Turkish slaves to form a new cavalry force based around being armored horse archers. It was about the time the Turks are really impinging on the Islamic world and impressing them with their prowess as archers. And Turks were just generally seen as people on the edges, on the periphery, and in the steppes are often being natural warriors, great horsemen, and superb archers. The Abbasids created this system where you would buy up Turkish slaves, put them through religious training to make them Muslims if they weren't already, and then train them as soldiers. By the Mamluk times, the training in theory could last up to 7 years, covering riding, shooting, using the lance, sword, maces. They were trained to be great all-round warriors.
So that they were bought as children or young adults.
For the Mamluks, it appears that most of them were generally bought when they were around about 10. And then they would have a couple of years of religious training to indoctrinate them into Islam. And then by the time they're coming up to puberty and the body starts developing is when they get 4 or 5 years of proper military. At the end of the training, they are released from slavery. In theory, Muslims should not enslave other Muslims. And I believe that is part of the Quran. Obviously, these things don't work out exactly as practiced, but at this point, they are freed. But the way slavery tends to work in the medieval Muslim world was that, despite the fact you have been a slave, you actually have a lot of loyalty to the person who is your master and is the person who's freed you. So they became incredibly loyal to their master, which then has a big impact on the political. Mamluks run the state because different groups of Mamluks are loyal to different people. It becomes very fractious. So although the Mamluks replaced the fractious Ayyubids, at times they could be just as...
Any similarity of Mamluk training to English public schools is purely coincidental.
I think it was probably more humane, although there are some real... They were encouraged to be beaten regularly.
So just like public school.
Yeah, so, they were not allowed to go and fraternise outside of their barracks.
Quite similar to Spartans in many ways.
And led to a very male-orientated society. And inevitably, lots of suggestions of inappropriate sexual behaviour between elder men and younger boys.
So it is public school.
Yeah.
Let's just get back on track. So when you say the Mamluk Generals were the people who took over the state. When we talk about the Mamluk state, it's the generals, is it?
The Mamluk state was just a military state. The Mamluks were just a military institution. Mamluk sons did not become themselves Mamluks. They could enter a different part of the army called the Halka, but they were definitely seen as second-rate soldiers. The best soldiers were all, and they continued to be buying in very large numbers of Turkish slaves. Ironically, the Mongols helped this, because as they expanded westward,
they created lots of slaves.
They created lots of slaves, especially Kipchak Turks, who were already quite sought after in Egypt by the Ayyubids for their Mamluk. And if I'm rightly, Baybars himself was a Kipchak Turk. So by creating lots of refugees and lots of desperate Turks who sold their children, the Mongols basically beefed up the Mamluk army, which then went on to be one of the few powers that regularly defeated them.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. The advantage the Mamluks had against the Mongols were a steppe army, so each warrior would have had quite a large number of ponies as for not only transport and fighting from, but also as supplying food. The Mamluks only had 1 horse per warrior. So in terms of logistics in the Middle East, where water is scarce and good fodder is even scarcer, the Mamluk armies had a significant advantage because they actually needed less fodder. So their horses were in better condition, and that gave them an advantage in the subsequent battle. That's the theory, anyway.
It sounds very plausible, and certainly the Mamluks had a very good record against the Mongols. I think up to the very early 14th century, it's something along the lines of 6 significant battles, and the Mamluks only lost 1 of them, and the Mongols lost the rest. So you suggest there is something reasonably intrinsically in favour for the Mongols, the Mamluks in that matchup.
So yeah. We're looking at so we've reached the point now where are we going to go back to look at the sort of history, or have we finished now the history of the Crusades? I think we've finished, haven't we? So I think it's time to move on to how these armies are put on the table in MeG. Would that be fair?
Yeah, shall we start by looking at the army lists?
Go.
So the armies we're looking at come from the medieval Crusades set. And we're going to start by looking at the Christians and the later Crusader list. So The Crusader armies are a mixture of knights and sergeants. So in the Fifth Crusade, you can have a few more knights than in the basic list. You've got these mixed tugs of knights and support sergeants. Along with that, you have foot, spearmen, archers and crossbowmen. And along with that, you get some native auxiliaries, the Maronite or Syrian archers, some Aryaban or Egyptian infantry, which is the poor, foot and skirmishers. So that's the basic army. And then as allies, you can have up to 2 contingents, subgenerals, not allies, apologies, or 2 contingents of military order knights. So the military order knights are the ones I know Ray likes, because you have the option of having a tug of fanatical brother knights in the later Crusader army as well.
Don't leave home without them.
So that's your later Crusader army. If you want a variation, the 7th Crusade list is essentially a French style crusading army. But we'll focus on the later Crusade. So I'm going to talk about my list first, if I may. So the list I chose is probably slightly unusual in that I went for a very foot orientated army. So my forces are an army that has just the 1 tug of knights and sergeants, and then has a separate tug of sergeants, but that's only a 4. So I have only the 10 bases of mounted in the main army, and then the foot, which are spearmen, and then the mixed. I went for the mixed tugs of crossbowmen and spearmen, along with the compulsory archer. But the unusual element is I went for an army with an Ayyubid Syrian ally. So in my ally, I've got a unit of guard Mamluks, a 2nd unit of Mamluks. So there's the superior protected cavalry. I went for unskilled bow, giving them short spear, and the guard ones get melee expert. Along with that, I had a unit of Turkmens in my ally and a unit of spearmen, the ally. It gives me 13 tugs, which is good. It's commanded by a talented instinctive army commander, 2 competent instinctive subgenerals, and then the Ayyubid ally is a competent professional. So getting a bit radical there, going with the competent ally. That gives me 6 PBS cards and 3 scouts for my army. So I think it's an army that can deploy and then reacts to your opponent's deployment if you're out scout. So in fact, I tested that theory out a couple of weeks ago against you, Ray, and it seemed to work all right.
Yes, it was a hilarious redeployment after you'd been out deployed.
I was out scouted. I don't think I was out deployed. 90% out scouted. Something rotten, really. I then switched my cavalry from one flank to the other.
It strikes me that this army, and just looking at the date you've chosen, it's obviously, to my mind, roughly based on the army that was defeated at La Forbie in 1244.
Yes, that's the army it was based on. Yes. We don't mention the defeat bit. That was
So yeah, I mean, it can be worth mentioning that battle, because in a way that had an impact on the Crusader states that wasn't dissimilar to the defeat at Hattin that triggered the Third Crusade, and it's quite probable that the defeat at La Forbie certainly played a part in Louis IX's 7th Crusade taking place.
Yes, the losses the Crusaders suffered were always going to be difficult to replace. Throughout its history, the kingdom suffered from a shortage of manpower, and big defeats like that were a major problem for the king.
Anyway, on to the list.
Before we move, there's things I like about your list. Not a lot, but I like some of it. I like the 6 PBS and 3 scouting for sure. I personally would never take a competent general with an ally because I'm Ray. You know, I'm not. I know you've done the maths, but I wouldn't do it. But it is an RJC special.
I think on that, Ray, you have to take a calculation of how much it hurts the army not to have the ally on side from the start. You know, and assume it'll take 2 or 3 moves to come on side, and you make the judgment there.
Yeah.
I think I would suggest that with this army, you could, because it's got a large number of crossbowmen to project damage at distance. It can survive a few rounds without those Iobid.
Agreed. But I mean, in the doing doing everything you can before before the battle starts. Going to a tournament thinking, okay, 4 games this weekend, and my ally is going to be unreliable in at least one. I don't need that stress. I've got enough stress without that. I've got enough stress rolling the dice.
I have more problems with the composition of the Iobid ally rather than the quality of its general. I genuinely don't think that taking unskilled bow makes them worthwhile.
I worked on the principle that I use them as combat cavalry, not as shooting cavalry. The army's got plenty of shooting anyway. I don't take the Mamluks for their shooting ability. I take them for the combat.
Why not take more knights? Would be the obvious question.
Mamluks are more controllable.
They are. Yeah, I can see the point there with the guard Mamluks who are melee expert. I'm less convinced on that with the ordinary Mamluks who don't.
Yeah, it's a compromise.
Absolutely, I mean, and managing those compromises is a list drawing up skill, and it would be a very dull game if we didn't have to make these compromises in the lists, and we could just churn out exactly what we want. I love the principle of the Iobid ally with Crusaders. I think it really adds to the Crusaders' flexibility. Despite, I'm not just saying that because I actually quite like using those sorts. I think I've played against a later Crusader that had an Iobid ally, and I was using another Muslim army, and I think it balances out the Crusaders to some degree. As you say, you've got a more controllable cavalry force there. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to have to hold them because they've got into charging lancer range. I think I think I would look on that maybe to. I don't know whether downgrading those spearmen, the Iobid spearmen, would give you enough points to make the ordinary Mamluks experience bow.
I doubt it would.
Yeah,
I think you have to make some other compromises.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one will be the Crusader archers are certainly ripe for potential downgrading.
Yeah, because you don't need them. You've got enough crossbow.
It's
except they're quite cheap already. They're already unprotected and combat shy, so they're only 240 points.
Yeah.
So you make them poor.
Yeah, but I would think
saving a great deal.
You're probably only looking at needing about 100 and something points to get the experienced bow on the Mamluk. They're only 200 points cheaper as a unit than the guard Mamluks who've got melee experts going to be at 20 odd points a base.
But overall, getting back to sort of the, going up a level of extraction, a bit more helicopter view, it's an army that can put pressure on your opponent across the line, isn't it? That's, with the shooting that it outputs.
And in the context of a Crusader theme, you think how we've drawn up the armies for the podcast. The crossbowmen cause real problems for a Muslim army that is going to be dependent on its mounted archery because they outrange them fundamentally.
Yep.
And obviously, if you take a punt and charge at them, the crossbows get the benefit of causing a wound on the S if they are charged. So it makes them very tricky. They
only has to be in one rank to get its plus. So no, let's. I tell you, should we move on to mine and then compare and contrast the two?
Let's do that.
Cool. Richard's feeling under pressure now. He wants to get off his list Get off my list. But I'm happy for you to laugh at my list. Okay, so I've used this list in a small tournament, and there's lots of things I like about it. So the date is 12/21. And it's Later Crusader, and the commander control is the army commander is competent, instinctive. They have a military order subby who's competent, professional, has to be professional, and then 2 other competent, instinctive generals. I have PBS of 5, scouting of 2. Not perfect, but I think I can live with it. And 6. I've got 11 tugs, no sugs, 11 tugs, breaking on 6. So the command and control, in my estimation, is enough for the size of the army. What I've gone for under the command of the military order general. I've gone for the military order knights, and military order sergeants in a tug. So that's cavalry, form loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, devastating chargers, melee experts. And then the sergeants just don't have the charging lancer, I think. Oh no, and they're protected. So they're downgraded by 1 sort of, but still very powerful. And obviously they give that 2nd rank for the dev charge. Then I've gone for the military order brother knights, and these are cavalry. And there's 3 of the knights, 3 of the sergeants. The military order brother knights, cavalry drilled loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, devastating charger, melee expert, fanatic. Yeah. And I'll come back to why. Then I've got some Crusader knights and sergeants, so more knights. So 6 of the Crusader knights and sergeants, and they're form loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, devastating charger, melee expert. And then the rear rank doesn't have the charging lancer protected. I've got another unit of 6 knights, which is the Outramar Knights. I've probably said that wrong. Cavalry, form loose, average, fully armored, charging lancer, dev charge, melee expert, 3, and then 3 of the sergeants to back them up. So I don't know whether I've gone for max knights, but when you're building an army at 10,000 points, I've gone for a lot of knights. And then what I wanted to do was to have 24 white dice of output from some kind of missile weapon, and a missile weapon that definitely outdistanced the pesky skirmishing cavalry that Nick Goutrogger will be using against me. I had his face in front of me when I was designing this. I got the army slightly wrong at first. I thought I could have loads and loads of crossbow, but you can't, because the crossbow you're converting into the crossbow with spear. So I've got 2 tugs of 6 of the archers, average experience bow, combat shy, don't care about the combat shy, don't care about they're unprotected. 2 of those. Then 2 of the Syrian archers, same again, average unprotected, experience bow, combat shy. Unfortunately, so I've kept the experience bow. They're tribal, and I've had to downgrade one of them to poor. But I've got 24 white dice, and I think that gives people a headache. Now, the battle plan is a very simple battle. Depending on the opponent, not really. I'm gonna smack you as hard as I can with the knights. And what I'll probably try and do is put the military order brother knights. I'll put them 1 rank even, and don't worry about the dev charge, and send them forward at right on the split between 2 of your tugs, and I'll hold those tugs and then overpower the rest of what's around you. And they'll go through anything. And what I expect the military order brothers to do is to defeat 2 tugs, then go and have your baggage. And that really is, it's a very simple Crusader plan. But the Crusaders by this stage had learned that you need a lot of output firing as well. And I think it reflects the history in the list. There you go. Ta-da! Ray's done an aggressive list. Surprise.
At least you thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked. I remember playing Bruce. I love Bruce, and I remember playing Bruce, and he lined up his, short spear, shield wall guys, and I just went straight over them, and he was like, oh, that didn't work very well. And then on the other flank, I was just shooting away whatever he had on his other flank. So it does work. Obviously, everything's situational, but it's really good fun.
Yeah, those brother knights would scare me.
They are frightening, aren't they?
Leading a night charge. There's, as I say, charge through the walls of whatever.
Babylon.
Babylon.
Yeah, Babylon.
To get there, and the supporting spearmen and crossbowmen help protect the flanks while you're doing it. I'm not. I think the archer component is more for fighting those pesky horse archers. Anything else. That would be my only concern using this army, would be against some opponents. Am I essentially leaving 4 tugs behind? But I mean, they're all dirt cheap, aren't they? The archers.
They're dirt cheap. They can go into rain, Richard. You know.
Yeah, you're looking at what, 900 points for the 4.
Yeah, it's under 10%.
840 points for
gets
4.
you up to breaking on 6. A lot to be said for it.
Yeah, definitely.
I think Richard is right. They are a potential target,
but I don't really care.
If you lose 4 of them, enemy only needs 2 more tugs.
Yeah, but I'm through them by then.
Yeah.
I'm sacking the baggage by then.
Well,
through them or you're dead.
Yeah, you're either doing it or you're
I'm
dead.
having a drink at the bar because I finished early.
Yeah, the Military Order Brother Knights are really nice, really powerful. They come with one thing that always concerns me. You have to have the general with the unit. He doesn't have to be fighting, but he has to be with them for the fanatic to count.
Yeah, but he's only commanding 2 tugs.
Yeah, but you just know he'll pull some rubbish cards just when the other unit needs to
move.
Actually, it's more likely not to charge for a move. And it's
but not charging is not in the plan.
It will be at some point. Especially if you're fighting an army that is inherently a bit more mobile than.
So let me ask you a question.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, right?
No. I want to explore a mitigating factor. He's a competent professional general, the military order.
Yeah.
So you can stack 1 more card with him, can't you? So he can actually hold 4 at the end of a turn.
Yes, but it doesn't mean he won't have spent anything probably at that.
Sorry, how does he get the 4th card in the first place?
Don't know, because he can't.
Well, that's true. He can't, because there isn't anybody to give it to. Yeah, it's
3 cards is enough. 3 cards.
3 cards should be enough to move those 2 units. I just think there is the potential at some point that you have to bear it in mind that it will limit your capability.
I agree. Agree.
But again, it's Richard said his list. It's one of those compromises, and also the sod's law. It will happen just at the point that the military order Brother Knights have taken enough damage that if the general moves away, they break.
Yeah.
But you pays your money,
but they should be shoulder to shoulder, shouldn't they? So I don't know. I'm struggling to think.
If you're putting them all in one line, it's probably irrelevant.
Yeah. And I think, to be honest, I think that's the answer. My answer is they're shoulder to shoulder.
Any army that has elements that are 370 has to be a good army mode.
Exactly.
So off to buy the fully armoured elephants now?
Well, that's the other option, isn't it? Pick a Thai army or something, a Mughal army with fully armoured elephants.
Anyway, so back to this one. This is a very good, very solid army.
It's really fun as well, guys.
Yeah, and sort of approaching it from the other side, the Muslim, the Ayyubid side, you'll have to be probably well on your game to take it out, but it does have targets.
Yep.
If you get your shooting right, and this is where the Ayyubids can fall down a bit compared to some other. Looking at Richard's army we just looked at, it's not overburdened with skilled shooters. But if you come up against somebody who's got more skilled shooters, they can whittle those front ranks off the knight. Obviously, it doesn't apply to the military order Brother Knights, who are a whole tug of real pain in a can. But the other knights can be whittled away, and they degrade fairly quickly once you've taken front rank bases off. And as I said, you will have to be careful about those archer units because an opposing Muslim army can be so flexible and run around.
I think I've learned something from Richard in these situations. Everything's situational, isn't it? So you've got to plan according to the army you're facing. But yes. Richard has drummed it into me that you can mix your foot and your cavalry. And if I'm coming towards your shooty skill bow, and I'm it doesn't matter. I'm mixing if you want to come close enough to shoot my foot are going to shoot you before that, and then I'm going to charge you. So I think there's always a way. By the way, you've got to remember to do it on the day.
Also, actually, this is exactly how, when they did get it right, that's exactly how the Crusaders did it. It was, we can go back to the famous case, the March to Arsuf in the Third Crusade, where basically Richard I of England used the infantry as a wall to protect the army, and then unleashed the knights at the right moment when the Muslims had to come quite close.
Yeah.
So, that interaction between the two is very important. And there are a number of battles where the Crusaders lost because they didn't get it right.
Yeah.
So,
it's not easy, but that's why we play the game, isn't it?
It is, but it's a great reflection on the game that if you use the historical approach and get it right, it works.
and this army is set up for that, to have that 24.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think it's a good. I would much prefer to face Richard's version if I had a Muslim army.
I shall take that as a rounding success, a vote of confidence. Okay, so let's move on, chaps. We've done Crusaders, but in time-honoured fashion, whose army would we rather take to a themed competition? We know the other. I'd take mine with a crazy number.
Out of those two, I would take yours to a themed competition. Although I have to say, if I had the Ayyubid ally the way I'd want it, I'd be tempted to take Richard just because I like
how the game works. Of the two armies as presented,
of the two presented, Ray, I will take yours.
And Richard, have I converted you to my crazy knight army?
Go
on, say it.
I'd be happy to use your army, but I'd still like the challenge.
Man. All right, guys. So, what are we going to do next? Who's leading some response from the Arabs?
So, shall I go through the Arab? I mean, essentially, there are three lists here: Ayyubid Egyptian, Ayyubid Syrian state, and Mamluk. And they're not that different each other. The cavalry component includes Mamluks, who are superior protected, experienced bow, short spear. The best ones are melee experts. You've got Turkmens, who are the flexible, unprotected, experienced bow, some of them skilled bow, usually up to 2/3. You generally then have other Arab cavalry, whether they're Syrian or Bedouin or Karagulams, which are the Berber cavalry, or even Kurds. Saladin himself was Kurd. And then they're supported by spearmen, archers, crossbowmen, if they could, in small numbers, because the Arabs actually were quite impressed by crossbow. And then a whole bunch of skirmishers. And that essentially forms the basis of the armies. The Mamluks have probably a bit more Al-Halqa cavalry, that native Egyptians and sons of Mamluk, to support the Mamluks themselves, and they potentially can have large number of infantry. Am I getting that wrong? No, they have less infantry. Sorry, it's the larger numbers of Mamluk. So yeah, you pays your points and takes your choice. The difference also is the Arab armies have professional, whereas the Crusader, the exception, are instinct. Right. So then the list I chose, if I can bring it up, I can't find it for the minute. Apologies. I know it's here somewhere. Here we go. So I chose an Ayyubid Egyptian army, and the difference I went for with this one was that I made it's sort of entirely mounted, apart from a sug of skirmish. I was trying to see if there was a sort of valid entirely mounted with no cap, but in the end the points limits defeated me. So I went with 3 units of Mamluks, 1 Sultan's Mamluks with skilled bow, 2 with just experienced bow, all superior spear, a unit of 6 Karagulams, those are the protected long spear cavalry, a unit of Kurdish cavalry, which is charging lance and melee expert, 3 units of Turkmens, 2 of them skilled bow, 1 experienced bow. They're form flexible. And actually a second unit of Karagula. So 9 units of cavalry and the infantry slingers thrown in. So it ends up with 9 tugs, 8 PBS and 5 scouts, 3 commanders, all professional. Yeah. Am I really convinced by this army? I'm not sure.
I'll tell you straight up, the command scares me to death.
I'm scared by the whole army. I'm scared to lose. You're almost scared to lose a tug.
Yeah, I mean, it's got 3 units of skilled shooters. I think in a themed Crusader competition, I think it's going to struggle. But I wanted to play about trying to all cavalry army. It's probably the sort that you want to pursue an already defeated Crusader army.
Or run away really quickly. Run away really quickly, drawing out the Crusaders till they get exhausted and then turn around and smack them. But I'm not so sure you can do that.
I think my best tactic would be to, while my opponent is laughing at the feebleness of my army, distract them and do some sort of clever tactical maneuver. I think that's a bit optimistic.
The lowest number of command cards I've ever used for a mounted shooting army is 11, 2 more than you've got here, and that is difficult. That is difficult, and that was one where that was the Western Han. Not, I hasten to add, the one I presented in the podcast some weeks ago, which quite frankly scared me as much as anybody. I really think these sort of armies do need to be hitting on the 12. I know 12 is a very sort of common default number, but I think it does make sense for these sort of armies. Iobid's an interesting one. I've looked at Iobid a few times myself, and there's something about it. I never seem to be able to get an army that I'm happy with, despite the fact it's got
good stuff. It's got good toys.
I think ultimately it comes down to, I want another unit of skilled shooters.
Right. Can I ask you a question, Nick, before we move on to the actual makeup of the army? Looking at the command and control, is your major concern that you want to be moving last, so you need to be able to throw cards away?
That's part of it, though I think that can be a bit overrated.
Okay.
A certain amount of, if you know what you're doing and calculate.
Yeah, well, I obviously don't, so I need lots of cards to throw. But just for our listeners who aren't as experienced, I mean, discarding cards is a very important part of the game.
Discarding cards is you can always pass
early and hope your opponent doesn't pass as well.
Passing early is it can throw your opponent sometimes if they're not really thought about it. On the other hand, somebody did that to me and I just went pass back at them.
Yeah, love it.
Because I looked at the table and went, actually, I'm quite happy with how it is.
Yeah. Actually, I want to be the active player, so pass.
Yeah. So and they sort of went, huh? They hadn't thought I would, but I did. I just think 9 is not enough. I think the lowest I've ever used in any army was 10. Was with my Edward IV English. And that worked okay, but you have to be on the ball.
You have to be on your game.
There's not a lot of room. I just think and again, as Richard said, you say you wouldn't necessarily be happy with this in a theme. One question is, how's it going to get out the way of your Crusader, for example?
Look, I'm going to become the Crusader. The only thing I'm worried about now is I get overconfident, because I'm going to steamroll on that. I am going to fucking, excuse my French listeners, I'm rolling that. I like the PBS and scouting, Richard. That's what I like about your army. The rest of it, you can keep.
Yeah. One thing I would be tempted to do with this army is split the skilled Turkmens down into 3/4s, just to be able to manoeuvre your skilled shooting around a bit more. But as we all know, and Richard knows as well as anybody, you have to be
very clever
manoeuvring around with those 4s of unprotected. You have to be a bit careful, but you've got the other units in there.
It doesn't have the command to use them.
Well, it's sort of linked to. That's why I'd want more command as well.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, I'd happily drop a couple of the Karagul arms, have that as a 4, and that's a unit that you would hope to insert into the flank of somebody.
Take this as a lesson not to.
I always think, a lot. I don't know how other people. It depends on how you learn with things, but I tend to have to go through the process of writing it down or even playing it. You sort of go, yeah, I don't think this is necessarily a good idea, but there's a little bit in the back of your mind that's saying it might be. You never know.
So before we move on, I'm voting for Nick's army, and I haven't even seen it yet.
Well, I think that was going to be a safe. You didn't have to see mine to know that Nick was going to choose the better army.
Right, come on, let's move on to Nick's. Yeah. And
shall I talk through
you might better rip that one apart as well.
Yeah, shall I talk through the list to give you a break, Richard?
Please.
Okay, Mamluk Egypt. Obviously, these follow straight on from the Ayyubids, and there's obvious continuity. In many ways, it's a similar army. Its core of this army is around the Mamluks, split between the royal Mamluks, that's the Mamluks of the reigning Sultan and his predecessors, and the Emirs Mamluks of the lesser generals and lesser commanders. The royal Mamluk, you can have up to 12 of them, and you've got 8 to 24 of the Emirs Mamluks. The big difference here from the Ayyubid is the royal Mamluks are skilled shooters at the start. All of them can be skilled shooters, and 3/4 of the Emirs Mamluks can be upgraded to skilled. So, that point I was just talking about in Richard's army, lack of skilled shooters. Mamluks get it. They get loads. Obviously,
yeah. Wow.
Obviously, that comes literally at a cost. Half of 0 to 6 of your royal Mamluks can be regraded to have armoured horse as well, in which case they get shoot and charge and cease to be loose and become close. The royal Mamluks can all have melee expert option as well, so they become quite effective.
So they're like cataphracts?
Sort of, but the rider's not fully armoured, so they don't get the fully armoured bonus in melee, but they get the armoured horse, so that's very good against shooting.
They're the guys with the big quilted horses you've got.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the armour that we classify as armoured horse in MeG would actually be cloth-covered metal.
Okay.
It would be scale armour, lamella armour, and well.
Right.
So obviously, your Mamluks are the core of your army. The supporting cavalry, you can have some more Al-Halka, who are basically the same as the Amir's Mamluks. They're just experienced bow, short spear. They're formed loose, not drilled. All the proper Mamluks are drilled. So they're sort of budget Mamluks. You can have a few long spear cavalry, which are basically like the Karagulams of Richard's list. You can have a small number of Turkmen Mercenaries, not as many as the Ayyubid can have, just 0 to 12, but 2/3 of those can be skilled shooters. You can get a few more skilled on the cheap. You have a few Bedouin cavalry, which in some circumstances can be useful, form flexible, average unprotected, long spear.
They are the troop type that flatters. I just can't. Well,
they can be very useful,
but I just can't get them to work.
They're round the flank raiders.
Yeah.
And because they've got the flexible, they can do the long move, flex to loose formation if they can get behind a flank when you're going to have the deck that's
11-inch charge, 11 base width charge.
Yeah, so they're tricky to use. That's the cavalry put. There's a host of junk. Well, I consider junk infantry anyway. Missile skirmisher infantry and a few crossbowmen and archers you could have in this list to bulk it out. Up to 6 Nafatun infantry skirmishers with firearm, if you like. And towards the end of the period of this list, which is sort of outside the period we've been talking, you can have a few guns. But basically, this army will live and die round the Mamluk. Generals are all professionals. There are no allies. So you are going to draw up your army from this. The core of it will be cavalry. I can't see how you turn this into an infantry army, not without being utterly suicidal. So there we go. I'm just going to respond to a message being sent to me. Yes, the list I circulated to Richard and Ray is unfortunately not a legal one.
Oh.
However, it isn't going to be the one that's going to appear in the supporting materials, which I will now describe to you. And has the advantage of being exactly 10,000 points, assuming I've got it right. Just for the listener, the one I circulated to the rest of the team had more of the upgraded Royal Mamluks with armoured horse actually allows. I got a bit carried away. Anyway, my list. I will go through it. Right. For command, I've gone for a competent CNC with a talented and 2 mediocre sub-general. You could alternatively go for 2 competents and a mediocre.
So this is completely different to the list I'm looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay, fine. All right.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. I fancied the talented, so that I've got
Can
a.
you send me
commander.
the list you're looking at now?
I could do.
Sorry, listeners, technical hitch.
Yes. Ray, pause.
So Nick has now sent us all the list, which is legal. So we can, at the point of talking about his list, we can now take the listeners through his list. He's told you what is available for him to choose from, and now we have a legal list in front of him. Great hilarity, because he's always slagging me off about my list building ability. So on that basis, Nick, crack on.
Okay, so I think I just covered the commanders. Competent.
No, start again.
Okay, for this list, I've chosen to go for a competent CNC, a talented subbie, and 2 mediocre subbies. Another option would be to have 2 competent and mediocre, which would actually be slightly cheaper in points. But I wanted the option of having the talented, partly to allow a 4-wide block move, and also just in case I really wanted to, it does open up the flank, but possibly less likely with this. I have gone for 6
flank marching all your flexibles.
It would be a point. There are flexibles in this, so you could do that, although I think that'd be a bit of a desperation. I just like the idea of having the possibility of being able to move a block 4 wide, possibly early in the game.
By the way, can I just say before we move on, I noticed on Facebook someone was slagging off my tactic of blocking off a flank march by putting a single line of absolute crap troops on the flank. Well played, sir, on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was situational, wasn't it, again?
Exactly. It's a game of skill.
It is. Anyway, I've gone for all 12 of the Royal Mamluks that you can have, with half of them with the upgrade to the armoured horse, with the shoot and charge and melee expert. The other half are just the drilled loose, superior protected, skilled bow shorts. The army only has the 1 unit that's got any melee expert. And I've gone for 4 units, each of 4 bases of the Emir's Mamluks, all drilled loose, average protected, short spear. 3 of them have skilled bow, 1 has experience. So that's the most skilled bow you can have out of those 12, the 3 quarters. A 4 base unit of Al Ashir Cavalry. These are the long spear cavalry, as I said, like Richard's Karagulams. I have gone for a small unit of the Bedouin Cavalry, form flexible, average unprotected long spear. I've had to downgrade them to combat shy. To some degree, this is a bit of a filler unit.
Right.
Or possibly act as just an irritant. Again, there are arguments for that maybe a unit of cheap archers might be a better option, but I've found I've had good use out of these Bedouin cavalry.
They can be a nasty flank attacks.
Yeah,
and I quite like them.
Yeah, so yeah, I've had good use out of them. They are something you have to get your head round using. And then I've got 3 units again, just a 4s of Turkmen Mercenaries, form flexible, average unprotected. 2 of them are skilled bow, 1 of them is experienced bow. So again, maximum the skilled shooter. So obviously this army will live and die by its skilled shooting. PBS of 7, scouting. Neither quite as good as Richard's, but I think scouting of 4 should be better than most Crusader armies.
Absolutely.
So again, the chances are these Crusader armies are likely to have something like 2. They might have 3. So you've got a good chance of outscouting, which help. And sometimes, like yours, Ray, they can have a low PBS one. So maybe you'll get the advantage in the PBS playoff before the games.
Yeah.
So, obviously this army will spend a lot of time manoeuvring around, trying to get as much out of its skilled shooting as possible. That taking off the front ranks of the knights. The inclusion of that 1 unit of the armoured horse Royal Mamluks. That is 1 unit. Again, it's one of those dither, should I, shouldn't I sort of units, because it is only 1 unit. But that's one that can ride down a Crusader infantry shooting. The armoured horse makes them really quite tough.
If you don't mind me asking, while we're talking about that particular tug, that only moves 4 base widths?
Moves 4 base widths and gets severely affected by terrain.
And I just wonder whether the benefit you get is negated by the fact that you might actually be slowing everything down to 4 base widths, and
No,
then
you'd be inserted. All your primarily shooting cavalry will go out front.
And then get out the way, and that charges in and
Get out
finishes
the way,
something
yeah.
off. Okay, right.
I've kept it to skill shooting because skill shooting, shoot and charge can be really grim if you're on the receiving end. Against an average infantry unit, in theory, you'd have to be bloody lucky, but you could do 3 skulls on them.
Yeah.
And even 3 wounds it could be.
So your shooting charges are on yellows?
Sorry?
Your shooting charges on yellow dice?
No, greens.
Oh, greens.
They'd be on yellow if you were poor or unprotected. Not poor, sorry, if you're unprotected, but not poor because the skilled already takes that into it. It gives you that 1 punch unit. And if you're desperate, 1 unit that could possibly stand up to a reasonably intact Crusader knight unit. But this army would live against Crusader will live and die on how you can get the shooting into the right position. But because it's skilled, it can outshoot on a limited frontage the Crusaders. You can gang up on the end of a line, not bad. And that 1 unit of the long spear cavalry, not the Arabs, the actual long, can just provide a useful threat to anything that might present a flank. I was saying about that 1 turn when you won't be able to hold the Crusader knights. If they charge off in your turn, and I can manoeuvre that little 4 onto your flank. I
mean, you've got 9 tugs, which are 4 bases.
Yes.
Out of your 11.
Yes.
And because it's you, I don't think there's many people who could use this. I really don't.
That Mamluk is really difficult. It's one I used early on, and it was a really harsh learning experience. Yeah.
I mean, you remember that army? We had a game the other night, but a lot of your armies are thematically similar. And I was using Carolingians, and you were using, I can't remember.
Khazars.
Yeah, and you had not a dissimilar makeup of an army, was it really, in that sense? Yeah. And you're bloody good at it, but I tell you what, it was God.
You can't make stupid mistakes. Have cavalry falls.
No.
You cannot make stupid mistakes.
Realistically, it's the only way you're going to get a lot of skilled shooters.
Right.
It's that trade-off. This army's going to try and win by shooting.
Yeah, I mean,
leave the stunned silence.
I'm silent because I know I couldn't do it. I mean, I've got nothing to say, and I think from the listeners' point of view, that many of them, some of them know you and played against you. Some of them know you by reputation. Most people don't know. I mean, this army. I mean, wow.
There are easier armies to use. Much though I like it, much though I like a lot of the history around it, there are other armies I would take before this one. But for this podcast, it seemed the obvious one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because thematically, but within this theme, and it's something that I would have considered if I was, say, doing an Iobid army, like Richard, take the Iobids with the Khwarezmian ally.
Have they got skill shooters?
No, you don't get more skill shooters. What they provide you is some charging lancers, superior charging lancers who are experienced bow, shoot and charge, and they are quite interesting. I've used those as part of a Seljuk Rum army and ran over some of Robin's Crusader mixed formation.
Wow. Yeah. So I feel like I'm kind of like in shock by the army, but my shock is based on I wouldn't know what the hell to do with your army, not anything else.
It's one of these. Don't start with this army.
Yeah. Don't start. Yeah,
but I'm going to claim a score draw. Ray wouldn't want to use either of our armies.
Doesn't work like that.
Well, maybe it's a no score draw.
Yes.
So
it's as I say, every podcast, skill to use shooty cavalry armies. You do need to practice. It wasn't one of the armies I used early on, but it was a previous version of the rule, previous version of the list.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out that well.
But I think these armies have got better as the rules have matured.
I think that they've certainly got more realistic.
Yeah. So against my Crusader army, matched up against that, I mean, I just think I could chip away with my shooting. Mix the knights in with the do what the Crusaders did. Mix the knights with the foot and chip away. And if you want to come and draw me out and do your fancy dancy, well, you're going to get shot. You're going to get shot, and I get a base. You're in. That's the trouble. If I get a base, what are you shooting on then when you come back in?
If you lose a base off a file, the skilled shooters are still shooting on.
Yeah, white. So I don't know. Look, I'm only thinking of it from my point of view. I would never argue with your list creation. But I don't. I would. Let's do this game on time. Not on Sunday because we've got a different thing to practice for. But we should play this game. My Crusaders against that Mamluk Egyptian. Maybe not. You don't fancy that. All right. So
no, you're. I think out of all the inner team competition, I pick your army.
So in time-honoured fashion, Richard's abomination on the Mamluk Egyptians. I vote for the Mamluk Egyptians.
Out of those two,
yeah, I'd go for the Mamluk.
Yeah, I think out of the Obid and the Mamluk, I'd be a lot happier with the.
Just the command and control. I mean, Richard started badly and it went downhill from there.
It's the command and control and the fact it's got that much skill shooting. I think they'll both stroke The Crusader is undoubtedly the easier army.
I given the choice, I'd use a Crusader.
A Crusader or Ray's Crusader, do you say?
Well, I might go even to say Ray's Crusader.
Hey! Right, so guys...
I had to pick a Crusader, I'd agree, but I'd by inclination, I would choose a different...
Right. That's you can't bend the rules like that, sorry. So now, chaps, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the history. We spent a lot of time talking about the armies, but I don't think there's been any wasted time. I mean, the listeners will decide that. But it's been a really meaty discussion. We've really gone into the lists. So I think we need to just move on to the figures very quickly. And there's some beautiful figures for this. Everyone does Crusaders, don't they? So beautiful figures. And then a bit about if either of you want to talk about the sources, or we just put the sources up on the blog. I don't mind either way, but certainly the figures we should have a little chat about.
Fine by me.
Nick, lead us off on the figures.
Okay, well, as Raider said, lots and lots of people do Crusader ranges, and indeed cover the Muslim opponents as well. So you can find lots out there. So I'll just provide you some highlights. As we said, we'll put up a list of some stuff up on the blog and take from there. One for both Crusaders and Muslims, Donington have ranges in their new era ranges. I use their Muslim ones for most of my Muslims, so they get my seal of approval for what it's worth. Legio Heroica from Italy do have ranges as well.
Big shout out for Giuseppe and Legio Heroica in this particular period.
Yep, they do. Again, we've got quite a few of the Muslims. They do a Crusades range, but that really covers only right up to the beginning of the ones we've been covering today. But he does a feudal range, wherein you get the knights in the panoply of the period we've been talking about, because things move on, helmets change, shield types. So you can get a lot of good, lovely figures from here. I've used his figures quite a lot for others. They paint up really, they look lovely. And if you're a good painter, they can be staggeringly wonderful.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. We always have to mention Essex. Essex do ranges for everything. So they can be a very useful shop. Again, just be a bit careful. They've got a Crusader range, but I would say certainly for the Crusader side of things, you probably want to be looking at their feudal and early medieval range for the period we've been to. But again, they cover Muslims and Christians. Merliton, another Italian company, have Crusaders and Muslims. Museum Miniatures, well known for good budget prices, nice figures at a good price. They have a Later Crusades range. But like a lot of their ranges, they tend to be a bit mix and match throughout the figures they do, but they do suitable figures. And Curzan Miniatures from the States have a 13th century range, which would be okay, which would be nice for the Crusader side. So those are the
very nice figures. Shout out for John as well.
Yeah, and always provides a good service. And for anybody who's actually sort of worried about the import side of it, because obviously coming from the States, it's an import. Yes, you probably will have to pay some import duty, but John arranges it so it's a nice seamless process. On the size of your order, it's either paid when you pay by PayPal or all well.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Agreed. John's found a way around it.
No, it's all above board. Yeah.
I think it's through eBay or something like that, isn't
it? It's handled for him. It's all sorted out, and figures arrive on your doorstep. 28 mil, as ever, I have to caveat this by I'm not so up on 28mm. For Crusaders, there's a company called Crusader Miniatures, who, funnily enough, have a Crusader range. V&V Miniatures also have a Crusader range. Essex, again, have Crusaders and Muslims in 28mm in their ranges. Other Crusaders, First Corps and Magister Militum figures. For the Muslims, Gripping Beast have a Saracen range, which I think has been mainly aimed at their Saga game, but it's got Muslim figures in it.
They're good figures, those Gripping Beasts.
Yeah, Griffin Beasts are nice figures. Magister Militum have some Muslims that go with their Crusaders, and Perry Miniatures have a Muslim range, Crusades period. So
you see, John at Kurasan announced some 28mm medievals. Did you see them?
Oh, right. No, I missed that.
Yeah, really beautiful. Really beautiful.
If they're of the right period, they'll be good, I would suspect. So those would be sort of my highlights, or in the case of the 25mm, the ones I found out about. So, always apologies to the fans of the 25, 28mm. It's just not really my thing.
Too expensive.
Too much painting.
Yeah.
I think if you are a good painter, I think the cracking thing about it, there's plenty of chivalry and do some cracking looks, and that's even true for the Arabs as well. That there's quite a lot of good in from the Arab scheme.
So what's our go-to sources of information then, quickly?
Right, well, there's billions of books on the Crusades. If you search on Amazon, you'll get loads, going back to, classics by Stephen Runciman and Jonathan Riley Smith, more modern authors like Dan Jones, and lots of people have read. There's inevitably loads of books on the military orders, especially the Templar, often with bizarre theories and some really wacky stuff. For the blog, I've personally pulled together some sources I think are quite good, more specific in terms of relevant for wargamers. There's a whole series of books that Osprey do on the Knights of Spittler, the Knights Templar. There's one that compares the Templar Knights to Mamluk warriors. There's a couple on the Mamluks themselves, and there's one on Saladin and the Saracen, covering the Ayyubids, and there's one of the campaign books on the fall of Acre. So, they're all good stuff. The usual illustrations, the usual sort of Osprey. Well,
pictures.
There are indeed pictures. There's the old WRG publication, Armies and Enemies of the Crusades by Ian Heath. Black and white line drawings, still got a lot of useful information in it. Probably a bit weaker on the Muslims, because when it was written, 40 years ago, Muslim sources were harder to. There's a book called Warfare in the Latin East, 1192 to 1291, by a chap called Christopher Marshall, which is an overview of the period. And there's a number of books on the Seventh Crusade as well. Louis IX, a bit of a tragic figure in many ways. It's the last proper crusade to the Holy Land, or close to, so that attracts attention as well. And there's quite a few books that cover sort of background issues on the equipment, and some useful books that cover the earlier Crusade period, but do line up some useful stuff on strategy, for instance, or just how the Crusades got to where they got. But really, there is a load of stuff out there on the Crusades. I mean, I don't know if Richard's got anything he would add to those I've just mentioned.
I think it's a case of there is plenty of choice, and go for recommendations, I would suggest. Try and find reviews on the books and get if you're interested in the history more than some of the weird theories, the reviews will probably send you right in which.
So I think it's been a fascinating trip through the history and the armies that you might use from that period, and hopefully our listeners will agree. So my question tonight, not the usual, what are you working on? So we're back to planning for tournaments, and I think the three of us are, well, we're all going to the post-COVID Cup, so that's probably less contentious to ask about that. We're all going to Armageddon, so that's the first big one, and I think there are still tickets available for Armageddon. I think 28 of the 40 have been sold already, and that's in July, so that's not too shoddy. So what are we thinking, chaps? What are we thinking for Armageddon? So if Armageddon is 500 BC to 500, so BCE to 500 CE. I've got 5 candidates. What are we thinking? Come on.
This is very sneaky spying out the opposition.
Oh, you're not going to tell me anything anyway, but I mean, it just...
I would, well, I'll go first because I'm going to try the early Achaemenid Persians. Can I? All these people who say I've ruined it, I've got to prove them wrong, haven't I?
Do you know what? I think that's an absolutely solid choice. When you hear about people saying they're bringing 24 elephants and 16 chariots, and just use the Achaemenid Persians, it'd be perfect. And I'm not so sure they've been nerfed anyway, as we discovered on a previous podcast. Okay, so which version, satrapal or royal?
Oh, I'd go the royal army.
Yeah, okay. All right. So
you will be the king of kings.
Yes.
With the harem of 1,000.
Is it? Oh no, I was going to say it's the other place where they have the throne. Okay, well I'm going to hold you to that. You're going with Persian. Nicholas, what are you thinking of?
I think like you, I'm at the stage of I've got a short list really. One possibility would be the early Carthaginians that I painted up and used last year that turned out to be, for me, a real surprise in how nice an army it was to use. There's always my 4th century CE Romans, which I've had used quite successfully, and I suppose inevitably the Sassanids crop up. I like it. I had quite a bit of success with it. I'm also wondering about, because it is any list 500 to 500, maybe roll out that Western Han I like, or something else from points east, just a bit different. There'll be quite a few classical armies in there. We're going to get the late Republican Romans, no doubt, regular Carthaginians, and all those normal ones. So maybe just something from the east, just to mix it up a little. There's one of the Korean lists I quite like the look at, just because, again, a bit different.
Yeah.
Thing rather than anything. And let's face it, the Armageddon it's the first big-ish get-together where we're all going to be, despite if we've been to the post-COVID cut and whatever, we're still going to be blundering our way through the rules to some degree.
Absolutely.
And, it'll just be fantastic just to get in a place and be pushing lead around with hopefully new opponents. And on that, anybody who's listening, especially if you're a relatively new player, this has got to be a great opportunity. 4 games, lots of people in one place, where everybody's just going to be so enthused to be playing again. Nobody's going to be out there to be a killer in any respect. And you get a lot of hints and tips and help if you're not quite sure. Even if it's your first game.
Absolutely. So I think I've managed to think of an army in every of the centuries available from 500 to 500. But I painted that early Carthaginian, copied Nick's army. I painted the early Carthaginian, so that's a possibility. I think that's a very nice army. I might even take that to an open competition. Very, very nice. I'm also, I'm still thinking of is it the Pompeian Numidian that that Richard tried to nerf, but I think that's still a great army, so I'm thinking of that. And I'm also thinking of things right at the other end of the spectrum, trying to squeeze something in from the medieval lists, which start in 500 or encompass 500. So there's some rather nice armies which are short spear, dev charge, with some good cavalry as well. So I think there are possibilities. There are definite possibilities. If you can't find an army you like between 500 BCE and 500 CE, then give up the hobby, basically. So I think it's going to be great. I think it's a great. I don't know how Hamby thought about it. He's off the top of his head. I think it's a great idea because you're going to get such variety. Hopefully, no 9 tug pike armies, but Sid can do whatever he wants.
I was just about to say, we're suggesting Sid might bring his own.
No, he's a changed man. He's a changed man now.
What, he's found a way to put a 10th pike unit in.
Yeah, he's going horse archer armies, apparently. Right, chaps. Well, honestly, thank you very much. Great pleasure. And I hope the listeners enjoy our ramblings about the Crusades and see everyone soon across the table. So thank you very much, chaps.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
okay, we are very, very privileged to be joined this week by Dr. Simon Elliot. He's actually honorary research fellow at the University of Kent. He's a prolific author and an all-round good egg. Now, There's two or three things that I want to get from him. But firstly, Simon, tell us a bit about your background, what you're doing, and how things are going.
Well, firstly, Ray, you should do my PR because that's a great introduction. And secondly, thank you so much for having me on your fabulous podcast with your cast of supporting characters as well. So my background is that I've got a doctorate in classics and archaeology from the University of Kent. But if you go back sort of 10 years, in my 40s, I did a couple of master's degrees part-time while I was personally working full-time in the city, helping run, or actually running PR companies, one in war studies at KCL and one in archaeology from UCL. Segued that naturally into doing a PhD at the University of Kent, where my focus was on the Roman military in Kent, so it was a natural home for me. And I realised then that I couldn't do that while working full-time. So since that time, I've got my own small business doing PR, but I spend most of my time writing books about the Roman world and now appearing on the telly talking about the Roman world. So my first book was published in 2016, Seagulls of Empire, which tells the story for the first time of the Classis Britannica, which is the Roman Navy in Britain. That was an award winner, actually. That won the Military History Matters Book of the Year award in 2017. And then since that time, I've now got 12 books.
Publishing into a vacuum with that book. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I've got it. I mean, there's nothing else around there, was there, about that?
What you've got to do there, Ray, so it's a very insightful question, Ray, if I may say so. It was deliberate because I looked around to find a book where I had complete carte blanche to write something completely new, which brought something very fresh to the debate about the Roman military in Britain. And there's so much amazing stuff already available anyway that I just thought it was best to do something new. So I looked at what I did in my PhD research, which was about the ragstone quarrying industry in the Upper Medway Valley where I live and how that built Roman London. The bit that's missing in that description is that it was built by the Classis, it was run by the Classis Britannica Roman Navy in Britain, and they then did the transporting and then they facilitated the building as well. So actually I had a whole body of research on this Navy, and it was a very easy, fun thing to do to write a book about the Navy itself. And since that time, I've now got 12 books on sale. I've got 3 more coming out this year, usually on Roman themes. So my Septimius Severus in Scotland book was an Amazon #1 bestseller. My Romans at War, the big glossy coffee table book, was an Amazon #1 bestseller in the US over Christmas. And now my big book that's just come out is about the Roman Britain's missing legion, the 9th Legion, which again is an Amazon #1 bestseller and has got a huge amount of publicity. And on the back of all the sort of various books, I've ended up doing quite a bit of TV work as well. In fact, I've just done my IMDb, and it turns out I've been on TV or broadcast mainstream 14 times in 3 years. And I've got 3 actual full-fat series to present I'm about to be commissioned to do as well. So I'm beginning to really enjoy life, sort of making a living from the ancient history. But to be clear, it's hard work and there's a lot of self-motivation involved in doing it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you've got to be, really surprised about in all this is that your dog is more famous than you.
It's prettier than me, that's why.
Yeah, okay.
Hector the archaeologist.
I love that dog. I've obviously met him a couple of times. I love that dog. And I think he is actually the reason for most of your success.
Well, it's Hector the archaeological dog. And if you can hear snoring, it's because he's snoring next to me. And actually, later this afternoon, we're going to be walking up to one of my Roman villa sites we're investigating. So the archaeological dog can do his thing. And
you're going to take me to that villa site the next time I'm down your way.
And further, more than that, almost certainly later in the year, maybe August or September, we'll be doing excavation. So any of your listeners who want to come and have an excavation and learn a bit about how to excavate a Roman site, feel free to come down.
I like your good friend, the Brummie lass, who thought she could take home what she found in an archaeological dig. I thought that was hilarious.
Which is so funny because in actual fact, the key thing is, of course, you've got to record everything. So you record everything and then you work out where it best sits. Then if nobody else wants it, you can store it. But the key thing is to first record it.
Okay. All right. So that's your background. I have to say, prodigious author. And then now you are a massive supporter of the MeG tournament scene. And also, you're very generous when it comes to the prizes as well. So talk a bit about MeG and why you think it's such a good thing.
Well, I'm a lifelong ancient wargamer. My entry points, well, as you know, my son is called Alexander, so you can guess where my sort of passion lies with the ancient world.
My son's middle name is Alexander.
There you go. You see, I hope what's his first name? Ptolemy.
It's a long story, but his first name is George. It's because I wanted him to be called George Oliver Duggins, so his initials on his rugby shirt would be God. But and for 3 days that was going to be his name, and then my wife. She got over the birth and said, "We are not calling him George Oliver." She saw through me. My
wife sees through me all the time as well. Well, I can remember the first time I went into the Skytrek shop in Nottingham in the early 1980s.
Wow.
Bought my first figure, metal figure, that is, which was a minifigs second edition 25mm pikeman with the pikes leveled, which you only realise once you've got a full phalanx you can never use because you can never actually get them into contact with an opponent. And then my first set of rules was WRG 5th edition. First competed with 6th edition, so I have hugely fond memories of wedges of Roman legionaries next to Palmyra and cataphracts, or wedges of companions next to Macedonian pikemen in my Alexandrian army.
Berserker wedges.
And then I went all the way through the VBA sort of series, Fox series. I've ended up playing MEG because I think it's an amazing set of rules where it's got this fantastic balance between fun, but it's also, I think, as a historian, it's important to me, historically realistic. And then you get this great jeopardy with the color system, with your cards or your dice, which reflects real life, you know.
Absolutely.
When I'm writing about the battles of Alexandria or Caesar, we're used as wargamers to have this god's eye view of the battle table, which they never had. Once they were committed with their battle plan, that had to be followed through. And that's exactly what you get with MEG, with a color system with your cards or dice. It's just a fabulous set of rules. The other point I will make, by the way, about MEG is I just think it's a great group of players as well. I've always enjoyed playing every competition set of rules or every set of rules in a friendly sort of scene, but just I really enjoy playing with the MEG players as well. It's just a great group of people.
Cool. Okay, so really, there is something that's happened this year which our listeners might not know about. But you know, you were asked to become a certain person in our hobby. Now, the Society of Ancients, Simon, is that just for old people?
No, it's not. It's for the Society of Ancients is for everybody, of all backgrounds and anybody who's interested in the hobby. So effectively, for those who don't know the Society of Ancients, it is a representative body for anybody in the world, because it's a global organisation, who wants to play ancient wargaming. And there are many entry points for anybody coming into gaming, as we know, whether it's through computer games, through Games Workshop, through any of the Warlord game systems, etc. And that all funnels through into playing ancient war games, hopefully with many players at some stage. Well, anybody who's interested in ancient war gaming of any age, of any background, the Society of Ancients is for you. And it's an amazing honour to become the president, because if you, I was looking at this myself when I was offered the opportunity to apply by the previous president. Some of the key figures which we grew up with, as names. Not meeting them, Tony Bath, Donald Featherstone. These are people who were, you know, heavily involved, founding, leading the Society of Ancients, leading the hobby. And now here's little old me, despite being 6'6" and a former number 8 in second row, being the president, being honoured to be the president of the Society of Ancients. It's amazing. So,
okay, all good. Now, I've got to declare an interest. I am a member, on and off. I've been a member of the Society of Ancients for, I don't know, 20 years. Someone down there will probably tell me I'm lying, but a long time. Okay. Now, so I received the magazine. That's what I engage with most. But tell us why should our listeners join the Society, wherever they are in the world? Why should they join the Society of Ancients? What does it do for the hobby?
It does a variety of things. Well, firstly, it's a central focus for anybody playing ancient wargaming. So we have a thriving forum, which is equally thriving with the MEG forum and many other forums, but it's a really, really good forum. Lots of academics engage in it as well. So you get a lot of interesting intellectual property being displayed and spoken about on the Society of Ancients forum. Also, it has the wonderful Slingshots 6 times a year periodical, which is a really powerful tool to encourage debate and research in ancient wargaming and warfare. There's the standard of academic rigor in the articles, despite them being very publicly accessible in the way they're written, is fantastic. But it's also really well produced in this day and age as well. So it would sit very comfortably with alongside anything that you would find in an airport news agents or a WH Smith's on your high street. The Society has these amazing tent peg events throughout the year as well, which encourage members and the public to come and see things to do with our hobby. So, for example, this year we have a virtual event over 2 days with 2 keynote speeches on the Saturday and on the Sunday. That's May the 22nd and 23rd. So that's our virtual event, which we're organising. And the keynote speakers there are going to be talking about really, really cutting edge research into the ancient world and ancient warfare and ancient wargaming. Then we have our battle day, which takes place in Newbury on the 15th of August, Sunday, where this year we'll have a lot of different games taking place with multiple players in each game, and all of it focused on one battle from history. And then all the players will write up their report through their own specific set of rules for how things went with them. And this year, the battle we're recreating on multiple tables is going to be the Battle of Bosworth.
I volunteered for that, believe it or not.
Well, there you go. That's fantastic. Well, I'll be seeing you there as El Presidente then. And then finally, we have our conference, which takes place on the 30th and 31st of October, which is at Madingley in Cambridge, where again at the conference, this is face-to-face, 30th of October, we'll have a variety of speeches and talks and games taking place on the Saturday and the Sunday. But in the evening, there's a dinner, a set-piece formal dinner for members, where we'll have a leading keynote speaker as well, somebody famous from the world of history or wargaming or elsewhere as well. So there are those 3 tent peg events. There's Slingshot, there's the forum, and then there's the wider attendance of the Society at most wargame shows when we go back to meeting the public again, where again we'll be having the opportunity to meet people. So it's like the front of shop, hopefully, for the ancient wargaming hobby, to encourage people not only to participate, but new people of all ages and backgrounds to join.
Cool. And ballpark, how many members are there in the world?
I think, well, it's in the hundreds around the world. It's in the hundreds and it's around the world. It's truly global. That's the fantastic thing about the Society of Ancients. It's truly global. So a lot of my correspondence I get now as the president come from every continent apart from Antarctica.
Wow. And because, everyone likes a deal, I believe this, if you're a Society of Ancients member, you get discounts.
There are discounts through being a member of the Society of Ancients to a wide variety of wargame, the finest wargame figure suppliers and wargames materials and rule suppliers from around the world.
Fantastic. Right, buddy. Well, anyway, my final thing, anything else that you want to just say to our listeners about anything? What's coming up, what you're doing, anything, just free form. Tell me what you want to say to them.
For all your readers who enjoy biblical or early classical gaming, I have a really powerful book coming out, which I'm very proud of. It's coming out in hardback for the first time on the 15th of May, Old Testament Warriors, which is a history of warfare from 9000 BC through to 500 BC, taking into account all of the great civilizations of the biblical world, whether it's Sumerian, Akkadian, Mitanni. I look at the Hurrians and how I believe the Hurrians were the vector through which chariots appeared with a Marianu. I talk about the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Hebrew kingdoms, etc. It's a real tour de force. But crucially, what I do at the beginning of the book, Ray, because at the beginning of the book is meant to be the beginning of warfare, I come up with a definition of warfare, what warfare really is. And then I look at the first example of warfare being the starting point of conflict, how we can say warfare began. So the definition I come up with it's fully described in the book. It's an academic definition, is basically warfare begins when you have a state engaging in war.
Yeah.
And the first evidence I argue that was the pre-pottery Neolithic A. So say that again, pre-pottery Neolithic A, first wall circuit of Jericho, which dates around 8,600 BC, which is over 1 kilometer long. It's 2 meters wide, 3 meters high, has an 8 meter high tower. 5 meters high, has an 8 meter high tower integral to it. And within that wall, that tower, there is an integral stone built staircase. So somebody in 8,600 BC sat down on the mud shores of the Dead Sea with a stick and designed the world's first fortification, which I think is mind blowing. It's all explained in the book.
Wow. And you know what? I without wishing to blow smoke up your backside, I tried to get that book in paperback, and I couldn't bloody find it anywhere. And now you're telling me I can get it in hardback coming soon.
Absolutely, yes, in reprint. It's fully updated as well. 15th of May.
Brilliant. I will pre-order it. Is it available for pre-order on all good book outlets now?
Certainly is, mate.
Good. I will go and order it. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. I could listen to your voice all night. And you did tell me that you'll start doing some audio books where you're reading your books. Can't wait.
Absolutely. You're very kind, Ray. Thank you for having me on.
All right, buddy. Cheers.
Cheers, buddy.